They said a man without a horse was already halfway buried, and by sunset, they were certain Ethan Cole had dug his own grave with his bare hands. The sun hung low over Red Hollow, bleeding gold across the dust, as Ethan stood beside the hitching post with his fingers resting on worn leather reins, the only thing between him and 30 miles of empty desert, and across from him. The Apache woman swayed slightly on her feet, her breath shallow, her eyes sharp despite the weakness trying to pull her down. No one in town stepped forward, not the shopkeeper who watched from his doorway, not the men leaning against the saloon rail, boots crossed, lips curled in quiet judgment, because helping her meant crossing a line none of them dared touch, a line drawn long before Ethan ever rode into this place. Let her walk, someone muttered under their breath, low enough to sound like advice, loud enough to carry. Ethan didn't answer. He just looked at the woman, really looked at the dust on her skin, the way her shoulders held steady even as her strength faded, the way her hand never once reached out to beg. His horse shifted beside him, a tired animal, ribs showing faint under its coat, but still strong enough to carry one man to water, strong enough to keep him alive another week. He could feel the weight of every eye in that street pressing into his back, waiting for him to choose himself like any sensible man would, waiting for him to turn away and leave her to the distance. Instead, he lifted the reins, slow, deliberate, and stepped forward. The woman's gaze followed the movement, cautious, unreadable, as if she had already decided what kind of man he was and was only waiting to see if she'd been wrong. Ethan stopped a few feet from her, close enough to hear the dry edge of her breathing, close enough to see the reflection of the fading sun in her eyes, and without a word, he placed the reins in her hand. No speech, no explanation, just leather passing from one life to another. A ripple moved through the onlookers, not loud, just a shift in the air, disbelief settling into something sharper, something colder. Fool, someone said, not angrily, just certain. The woman didn't thank him, didn't bow her head, didn't soften. She only held the reins for a moment, as if weighing more than their weight, then nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, before turning and mounting with the last of her strength. The horse moved, slow at first, then steadier, carrying her toward the open desert where the horizon swallowed everything that mattered. Ethan watched until the dust closed behind her, until the shape of horse and rider blurred into heat and distance, and then he turned away from the town, from the eyes, from the safety he had just given up, and began to walk. The first step was quiet, the second heavier, and by the time he reached the edge of Red Hollow, no one was laughing anymore. But no one followed either, because out there, beyond the last fence post and the last shadow, the desert didn't forgive men who walked it alone, and Ethan Cole had just chosen to do exactly that. The desert did not welcome him. It simply accepted that he was there, the way it accepted stones and bones and things that no longer had a choice. Ethan Cole walked with steady steps at first, boots pressing into dry earth that cracked under the weight, the last sounds of Red Hollow fading behind him until even memory seemed quieter, and all that remained was wind, low and constant, brushing across the land like a whisper that never quite formed words. The sun climbed again, higher, hotter, turning the air thick enough to taste, and every mile stretched longer than the last, as if distance itself had decided to resist him. He kept his hat low, his eyes forward, counting steps without realizing he was counting, because numbers gave shape to something that otherwise had none. 1 mile, maybe 2, then more, the rhythm becoming the only thing holding him upright. His throat dried first, a slow tightening that made swallowing feel like work. Then his shoulders grew heavy, then his legs, each movement asking a question his body was less certain how to answer. Still, he did not turn back, not once. Not even when the memory of leather reins brushing his palm came back sharper than the heat. Not even when the image of the horse walking away carried a weight that pressed against his chest harder than the sun above him. By midday, the horizon shimmered, bending light into shapes that were not real, distant shadows that looked like water, like trees, like something a man could reach if he just kept going. And Ethan knew better, but knowing did not stop his eyes from following them. Did not stop the quiet part of his mind from hoping just enough to make the next step possible. He paused only once, not because he wanted to, but because his legs refused to move for a moment. And when he stood there, alone in a stretch of land that offered nothing and promised less, he let his breath settle, slow and shallow, and listened. There was nothing, no birds, no distant riders, no sound but the wind moving across empty ground. He closed his eyes briefly, just long enough to feel the silence fully, just long enough to understand what it meant to give something away and receive nothing back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. When he opened them again, the light had shifted, the sun beginning its slow descent, and the air, though still hot, carried the faintest hint of change. He moved again, slower now, each step placed with care, conserving what little strength remained, because out here, haste was just another way to disappear. As evening approached, the sky softened into colors that did not belong to the day, pale gold, then deeper amber, stretching across the wide, open space above him. And the temperature dropped just enough to remind him that night would come soon, and with it, a different kind of test. Ethan reached a small rise, nothing more than a gentle swell in the land, but enough to give him a view of the miles behind and the miles ahead, both equally empty, both equally unforgiving. He stood there longer than he intended, not searching for anything in particular, just letting his eyes rest on the horizon, on the line where earth met sky, where things began and ended without explanation. For a moment, he thought of the town, of the men who had watched him walk away, of the certainty in their voices, and he almost smiled, not because they were wrong, but because they had never stood where he was standing now, had never felt what it meant to choose something that could not be measured in miles or water or survival. The wind shifted slightly, carrying with it a sound so faint it could have been imagined, a distant echo that did not belong to the stillness, and Ethan turned his head, listening more closely, his body tightening in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with instinct. Because sometimes, out here, the smallest sound meant the difference between ending and something else entirely. The sound came again, faint, stretched thin across the distance, not wind, not quite, something with rhythm buried inside it. And Ethan Cole stood still on that low rise, his breath held without him realizing, his head tilted just enough to listen harder. The desert did not give echoes without reason, and whatever he was hearing did not belong to emptiness. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon where the last light of evening brushed the land in long shadows, his eyes narrowing against the glare, searching for movement, for shape, for anything that could explain the quiet disturbance pressing against his senses. For a moment, there was nothing, only the same endless stretch of earth and sky, the same silence that had followed him since he left Red Hollow. And he almost let it go, almost convinced himself it was nothing more than fatigue playing tricks on a body pushed too far. Then he heard it again, clearer this time, a low, distant tremor, steady, repeating, like something moving with purpose across miles of open ground. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with awareness, the kind that came from years of living where survival depended on noticing what others missed. He shifted his weight, one foot sliding slightly in the dust, grounding himself, steadying the moment. The sound grew, slowly, almost carefully, as if it was not meant to be rushed, and with it came a faint disturbance along the horizon. A thin line where the air did not sit still, where heat bent differently, where something unseen pressed forward. Ethan's eyes fixed on that line, watching as it thickened, as the stillness began to break apart into something alive, something real. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows that stretched toward him like reaching hands. And within those shadows, shapes began to form, small at first, barely more than movement against the fading light, but growing, multiplying, becoming clearer with each passing second. He did not move, not even as the truth began to settle in, not even as the rhythm beneath the sound revealed itself fully, unmistakable now. The steady cadence of hooves striking earth in unison, not one, not two, but many. His throat tightened again, dry and rough, but not from thirst this time. The desert had been empty when he entered it, silent, indifferent, but now it was answering, and the answer was approaching faster than anything out here should. The line on the horizon rose, expanded, resolved into figures riding low against the wind, their silhouettes dark against the last light of day. their movement controlled, deliberate, as if guided by something beyond urgency. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle over him, heavy and quiet, pressing into his chest, into his bones, into every step that had brought him here. He did not reach for anything, did not step back, did not call out, because there are moments in a man's life when action only breaks what is meant to unfold, and this felt like one of them. The riders drew closer, the sound of their approach no longer distant, no longer uncertain, but strong, steady, filling the air that had been empty only moments before. Dust rose beneath them, carried by the wind, catching the last light and turning it into something almost unreal, something that blurred the line between what was seen and what was believed. Ethan stood there, alone on that rise, as the desert shifted around him, as silence gave way to motion, as something he had not expected, something no one in Red Hollow would have believed, moved steadily toward him, and for the first time since he let go of those reins, he understood that the choice he made had not disappeared into the distance. It had only been carried somewhere beyond his sight, waiting for the right moment to return. They did not rush him, and that was the first thing Ethan Cole understood as the riders came closer, their pace steady, controlled, as if time itself bent slightly around their approach. The sound of hooves filled the air now, no longer distant, each strike against the earth landing with a weight that carried meaning beyond movement, beyond travel, something deliberate, something chosen. Ethan remained where he stood on the rise, the wind brushing past him, lifting the edge of his coat, drying the last trace of sweat against his skin, and for a moment, everything narrowed, the desert, the sky, the fading light, all of it drawing inward toward the line of riders advancing through the dust. He counted them without meaning to, 1, then 3, then more, until the number stopped making sense, until it was no longer about how many, but about what they represented. The horses were not worn like his had been, not thin, not struggling, but strong, broad-shouldered, their movements smooth even across uneven ground, their coats catching what little light remained and holding it like something alive. The riders sat tall, their posture balanced, quiet, not a single wasted motion among them, their presence filling the space without a word spoken. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not fear, not relief, but recognition, the kind that did not come from knowing names or faces, but from understanding weight, consequence, the echo of a decision returning in a form larger than the moment it came from. The lead rider slowed first, the others following without command, without signal that Ethan could see, the formation tightening as they approached the base of the rise where he stood. Dust rolled around them, rising in soft clouds that caught the last gold of the sun, turning the scene into something almost unreal, something that felt like a memory before it even finished happening. Ethan's eyes moved across the line, searching without urgency, until they found her. She sat at the front, straight-backed, steady. The same woman who had taken the reins from his hand, her presence unchanged, her gaze fixed on him with the same quiet intensity. But now there was something else beneath it, something deeper, something that had not been there before. The horse beneath her was not the one he had given. And that detail settled into him slowly, like a realization that needed no explanation, only acceptance. She guided the animal forward a few steps, stopping just short of the rise, her eyes never leaving his, and for a moment, neither of them moved, the space between them filled with everything that had passed without words. The other riders remained still behind her, their horses calm, their silence unbroken, not tense, not threatening, but heavy with purpose. Ethan took one step down from the rise, then another, his boots pressing into the dust as he closed part of the distance, not out of confidence, but because standing still no longer felt right. He stopped when the ground leveled, the two of them now facing each other across a few yards of open space, close enough to see clearly, far enough to keep the moment intact. The woman reached down slowly, her hand moving to the reins, and with a motion as controlled as everything before it, she loosened her grip and let the leather fall. Forward, not to the ground, but toward him, an offering without force, without demand. Ethan did not reach immediately, his eyes flicking briefly to the line of horses behind her, to the quiet strength gathered there, to the scale of what stood before him. and then back to her. Something in his chest tightened, not from doubt, but from the weight of understanding settling into place, because whatever this was, it was not repayment in the way men in town spoke of debt. It was something older, something carried through action, through memory, through the kind of silence that said more than any words ever could. The reins hung in the air between them, swaying slightly with the breath of the horse, and Ethan Cole looked at them the way a man looks at something he knows will change everything if he touches it. His hand lifted slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for the moment, for the silence that had carried them both this far without a single word needing to be spoken. When his fingers finally closed around the leather, it felt different, not just because it was not the same worn strap he had let go of hours before, but because of what it now carried, weight that did not belong to one man anymore. The woman watched him, her gaze steady, and for the first time, something in her expression softened, not into a smile, not into gratitude as men in towns understood it, but into recognition, the kind that passes between two people who have seen the same truth from opposite sides. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, yet it held more meaning than any spoken thanks. Ethan gave a faint nod in return, his movement just as restrained, just as deliberate, as if anything more would disturb the balance that had formed between them. Behind her, the line of riders remained still, their presence no longer approaching, no longer pressing forward, but settled, complete, as if the purpose of their journey had already been fulfilled the moment the reins changed hands. Ethan's eyes moved again, taking in the horses, their strength, their number, the quiet power standing in formation beneath the fading sky, and he understood. Then that this was not excess, not display, but a message, one written in a language older than trade or debt. He stepped forward, one pace closer, and the horse before him shifted its weight, calm, unafraid, as if it already knew where it belonged. Ethan's hand moved along the rein, then to the neck of the animal, feeling the warmth beneath its coat, the steady pulse of life that mirrored his own, grounding him in a way the open desert never could. The woman turned her head slightly, giving a brief signal, and one of the riders guided a second horse forward, then another, until a small group stood closer to Ethan, their reins loose, their presence offered without force. He looked at them, then back at her, a question unspoken, and she met his gaze with quiet certainty, as if to say the choice was still his, as it had always been. Ethan let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to allow clarity to settle in. He did not reach for all of them, did not step into the line and claim what was given in full, because something inside him understood that this moment was not about taking, it was about acknowledging. His hand remained on the first horse, the one closest, the one that had been placed before him, and he gave a slight shake of his head, not in refusal, but in measure. The woman watched him closely, her eyes narrowing just a fraction, reading the choice as it formed. Ethan stepped back half a pace, his grip on the reins steady, and then he looked past her, toward the open desert behind the riders, then back again, as if tracing the path that had led them all here. The wind moved through the space between them, lifting dust, carrying the faint scent of leather and earth. And in that quiet, shared stillness, the meaning settled fully, not as something spoken, but as something understood, something that would not fade with the light or the passing of time. The wind shifted again, softer now, carrying the last warmth of the day as it slipped into evening, and Ethan Cole stood with the reins in his hand, feeling the weight of a decision that was not finished yet. The horse beside him breathed steady, calm, as if it had already accepted him, as if it understood something he was still working through. He glanced once more at the line behind the woman, at the quiet strength gathered there. 50 lives standing patient, offered without demand, without expectation, and something in his chest pressed tighter, not from doubt, but from knowing what it would mean to take all that was given. His fingers tightened slightly on the leather, then eased, the motion small but certain, like a man testing the edge of a thought before stepping fully into it. He turned his body just enough to face both her and the horizon beyond, as if measuring two paths that could not be walked at the same time. For a long moment, no one moved, not the riders, not the horses, not even the wind that seemed to pause in respect of what was being decided. Then Ethan took a slow breath, deep enough to steady the ache in his chest, and he lifted the reins just slightly, enough to show acceptance, but not possession. The woman watched him closely, her eyes narrowing with a quiet understanding that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with recognition. She had seen men take more when given less, had seen hands close tight around things they had not earned. But this was different, and the difference sat between them like something solid. Ethan stepped forward once, then stopped, his boots pressing into the dust, grounding him, and he spoke for the first time since the desert had answered him, his voice low, rough from the miles behind him, but steady. One is enough. The words simple, carried by the air without force, yet they seemed to settle across the riders like a stone placed gently in water, rippling outward in quiet understanding. The woman did not respond with words. She only studied him for a breath longer, then gave a single nod, deeper this time, a gesture that acknowledged not just the choice, but the man who made it. She turned slightly in her saddle, lifting her hand just enough for the others to see, and the line behind her shifted, not forward, not closer, but apart, the horses easing back, their presence no longer pressing toward him, but settling into something that felt like respect. Ethan watched the movement, the way the group adjusted without sound, without confusion, each rider understanding their place in the moment, and it struck him then that what stood before him was not an offering of wealth, but a reflection of something far more precise. He moved his hand along the horse's neck again, feeling the warmth, the steady life beneath his palm, and for the first time since he had stepped into the desert, the weight inside him eased, just enough to let something quieter take its place. He swung the reins lightly, guiding the horse a half-step closer, then paused, his eyes lifting to meet hers once more, and in that shared silence, something passed between them that did not need language, a recognition that the balance had been kept, that nothing had been taken without meaning, and nothing given without purpose. The sky above them darkened by degrees, the last light slipping behind the horizon, leaving only a soft glow along the edge of the world, and in that fading light, the moment settled fully into place, complete not because of what had been given, but because of what had been understood. The light faded slower than he expected, stretching the moment thin across the horizon, as if the desert itself was unwilling to let it end too quickly, and Ethan Cole stood beside the horse he had chosen, feeling the quiet settle around him in a way that was no longer empty. The riders had not left, not yet. They remained where they were, spread across the land like something rooted, something that belonged there in a way he never had, and yet, for the first time, he did not feel like an outsider standing at the edge of something he could not understand. The woman shifted slightly in her saddle, her gaze lifting from him to the sky, then back again, measuring something unseen, something carried in the air that did not need to be spoken. Ethan followed her glance without thinking, watching the first hint of night gather above them, stars beginning to show through the fading blue, quiet and distant, as steady as the ground beneath his feet. The horse beside him moved its head, brushing lightly against his shoulder, and the simple contact brought him back, grounded him in the present, in the reality of what had just unfolded. He reached up, resting his hand against the animal's neck again, slower this time, more certain, and the horse did not pull away, did not resist, it simply stood, accepting, as if the choice had already been made long before this moment arrived. A faint sound moved through the line of riders, not a command, not a signal, but something shared, something that passed between them without needing form. And one by one, they began to turn, not in haste, not in retreat, but with the same measured control that had brought them here. Ethan watched as the formation shifted, the space between them widening, their direction changing toward the open land beyond, toward the place where the horizon swallowed everything that did not stay. The woman remained where she was for a moment longer, her eyes still on him, holding the connection just long enough to make it real, just long enough to make it last. Then she inclined her head once more, not as a farewell, not as a promise, but as something in between, something that carried both without claiming either. She turned her horse with a subtle movement, and the animal responded instantly, aligning with the others as if it had always been part of that line. Ethan felt the shift as they began to move, not just in the ground beneath him, but in the air itself, as the presence that had filled the desert started to recede, leaving behind something quieter, something deeper. The sound of hooves returned, steady, fading with each step, carrying them farther into the distance, until the shapes blurred again into shadow, into memory, into something that would be difficult to explain to anyone who had not stood where he stood now. He did not call out, did not follow. He simply remained where he was, watching until the last trace of movement disappeared into the darkening land. The silence that followed was different from before, not empty, not indifferent, but full, as if it held the echo of what had just passed through it. Ethan let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering as the tension he had carried since leaving the town finally released its hold. He looked down at the horse beside him, then out toward the path ahead. The same desert, the same distance. But something in it had changed, or maybe something in him had. He gathered the reins gently, turning his body toward the direction that would lead him back, not just to the town, but to the place where this choice would be seen, where it would be measured by eyes that had not understood it before. And as he took his first step, the horse moving with him without hesitation, the night settling fully over the land, there was a quiet certainty in the way he walked, not faster, not stronger, but steadier, as if the path beneath him had finally decided to meet him halfway. The night carried him differently than the day had, cooler, quieter, but no less demanding, and Ethan Cole walked beside the horse with a steadiness that had not been there before, his hand resting lightly on the reins, not pulling, not guiding, just present, as if the two of them had come to an understanding without needing to speak it aloud. The stars spread wider overhead with each passing mile, sharp and endless, casting a pale light across the land that turned shadows into something softer, something less threatening. And for the first time since leaving Red Hollow, the desert did not feel like an enemy to cross, but like a path to follow. The horse moved in rhythm with him, matching his pace without resistance, its breath slow and even, its presence grounding in a way that cut through the exhaustion still lingering in his bones. He could feel the miles behind him now, not as weight, but as distance earned, each step no longer a question, but an answer that had already been given. Some time passed. Midnight. He paused, not because he had to, but because the land opened slightly, offering a view back toward the direction he had come from, and he turned, just for a moment, letting his eyes trace the darkness where the riders had disappeared. There was nothing there now, no movement, no sound, only the memory of something that had passed through and left no mark except the one carried inside him. He nodded once, small, almost to himself, then turned forward again, gathering the reins with a gentle motion as he began to move once more. By the time the first hint of dawn began to touch the edge of the sky, the outline of Red Hollow came into view. Low buildings pressed against the land as if trying not to be noticed, the same place he had walked away from with nothing, the same place where every eye had measured him before he even spoke. The horse slowed slightly as they approached, sensing the change in ground, the shift from open desert to worn paths and scattered structures, and Ethan adjusted his pace to match, his steps calm, deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant. The town was waking, slowly, the first signs of movement stirring in doorways and along the street. Men stepping out with the stiffness of early morning, women pausing with buckets or tools in hand, their attention drawn by the quiet arrival that did not match the man who had left the day before. Ethan did not announce himself, did not call out. He simply walked into the street, the sound of his boots and the soft rhythm of the horse enough to carry his presence forward. Eyes turned, one by one, recognition settling in, followed by something else, something harder to name. He saw it in the way a man at the saloon door straightened slightly, in the way another lowered his gaze after a brief glance, in the way the space around him seemed to shift without anyone stepping closer or moving away. The same voices that had spoken before were silent now, not out of fear, but out of something closer to understanding, or at least the beginning of it. Ethan stopped near the hitching post where everything had begun, his hand lifting just enough to secure the reins, the motion simple, familiar, but carrying a different weight this time. He rested his palm briefly against the horse's neck, then stepped back, his eyes moving across the faces watching him, not challenging, not seeking approval, just present. The morning light grew stronger, filling the space between them, revealing every detail that could not be hidden in shadow. And in that light, something changed, not loud, not sudden, but certain. As if the town itself had been forced to see what it had missed before. Ethan turned slightly, his gaze drifting past the buildings, past the people, toward the open land beyond, and for a moment, the silence held, not empty, but full of something waiting to be understood. No one spoke, and that silence carried more weight than anything Ethan Cole had heard in this town before, heavier than laughter, heavier than judgment, because now every eye that had once dismissed him was forced to hold steady and see what stood in front of them. The horse beside him shifted slightly, its coat catching the early light, strong, unbroken, nothing like the worn animal he had led away from this same post the day before. And that difference alone was enough to settle something. Deep in the room of unspoken thoughts around him, Ethan did not explain, did not look for words to fill the space. He simply stood there, one hand resting loosely at his side, the other brushing once along the horse's neck as if to remind himself that it was real, that the miles, the silence, the choice had all led back to this moment. A man near the saloon finally shifted his weight, clearing his throat as if preparing to speak. But the words never came. They stayed caught somewhere between pride and realization, and instead he lowered his gaze, the smallest movement, but enough to be noticed. Others followed, not all at once, but gradually, a glance away here, a step back there, the kind of quiet retreat that comes when certainty breaks without needing to be challenged. Ethan saw it, but he did not hold on to it, did not let it change the way he stood or the way he breathed. Because whatever had happened out there in the desert was not something meant to be traded for approval. He reached for the reins and adjusted them on the post, securing them with a simple knot. The motion steady, familiar, grounding him back into something ordinary after everything that had been anything but. The morning grew brighter, the shadows shrinking, revealing more of the town, more of the faces, more of the small details that had always been there, but had never seemed to matter. Somewhere behind him, a door creaked open, the sound cutting gently through the stillness, followed by the faint shuffle of boots stepping onto wooden planks, life beginning again in the quietest way possible. Ethan turned his head slightly, not enough to meet anyone directly, just enough to take in the movement, the change, the shift that had settled over the place without anyone naming it. He stepped away from the post then, leaving the horse where it stood, not claiming more than he needed, not drawing attention to what had been given, and began to walk down the same stretch of dirt road he had crossed countless times before. His pace was even, unhurried, each step landing with the same calm certainty that had carried him through the night. And as he passed by the others, no one stopped him, no one called out. They simply watched, their silence no longer filled with judgment, but with something quieter, something closer to respect, even if they did not yet have the words for it. At the edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the land opened once more, Ethan paused, just for a moment, his eyes lifting toward the horizon where the desert stretched wide and endless, unchanged and yet not the same. He took a slow breath, the air cool in his lungs, and then he stepped forward again, not away from the town, not running from it, but moving with it behind him, as part of the path he carried now. And in the stillness that followed, with the sun rising higher and the world settling into another day, one truth lingered without needing to be spoken. Out here, a man was not measured by what he kept, but by what he was willing to let go. And sometimes, the desert remembered.